I broke my grandmother's china plate on purpose. My parents called me selfish, dramatic, ungrateful. Can you believe it? All because I finally refused to be the disappointing understudy to my sister's starring role. Let me take you back to when I still believed that earning my family's approval was worth losing myself. Your sister's balsamic reduction was thicker. My mother's words sliced through the steam rising from the carefully plated beef medallions I'd just set before her. The dining room fell silent, except for the gentle clink of silverware against my grandmother's china. I forced a smile, though my fingers tightened around the serving tongs until my knuckles whitened. "I'll try to remember that for next time," I said, swallowing the familiar bitter pill of inadequacy that had become my constant companion at these gatherings. This was the third family dinner I'd hosted this month, and the 14th critique I'd received. Not that I was counting. Each barb collected in a mental tally that grew heavier with every passing Sunday. The text message had arrived 3 days ago. "We're bringing the Hendersons this time." Richard loved Emily's coq au vin. Try to recreate it if you can. My apartment now smelled of rosemary and garlic, the scent of 4 hours preparation. I'd left work early, rushing to the specialty market across town for the specific cut of meat my father preferred. The tablecloth was pressed, the wine was breathing, the candles were lit. None of that seemed to matter now. "And these plates," my father chimed in, running his finger along the rim of my grandmother's china that I'd inherited when Emily moved across the country. "They've got water spots. Emily always polished them before serving." Emily, my older sister, the gold standard by which all my efforts were measured and found wanting. Around the table sat my parents' oldest friends, the Donovans and the Hendersons, who had been coming to our family dinners for as long as I could remember. They shifted uncomfortably in their seats but said nothing. This was normal. This was how it always went. "The fish is a bit dry," Mrs. Henderson finally offered, her voice apologetic, but her words another needle under my skin. Emily had such a way with seafood. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat along with a bite of my apparently inferior cooking. 4 years of carrying on the family tradition of monthly dinners since Emily moved to Seattle, and not once had I heard, "This is delicious, Madeline," or "Thank you for doing this." Instead, I collected comparisons like painful souvenirs. Not as flavorful, not as elegant, not as witty, not as welcoming, not as Emily. As I cleared the plates later that evening, scraping uneaten food into the garbage, my mother leaned against the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone. "You know, if this is too much for you, you could always just have it catered," she said, not looking up. "The Hendersons mentioned they need to leave earlier these days. They're getting older. These dinners used to go until midnight when Emily hosted." Something inside me, something that had been bending and accommodating for years, finally snapped. The sound of it breaking was almost audible in my mind. I set down the stack of plates with enough force that the top one slid off, cracking against the countertop. The sound was sharp and final. "I'm done," I said, the words escaping before I could filter them. "I can't do this anymore." My mother's eyes widened as she looked up from her phone. "What are you talking about?" "The dinners. I'm not hosting them anymore." My voice was steady, surprising me with its clarity. 4 years of trying to live up to Emily, and I still can't get it right. I'm tired of feeling like a disappointment in my own home. "Don't be so dramatic, Madeline. We're just trying to help you improve." "No," I interrupted, feeling a surge of something unfamiliar. Self-preservation, perhaps. "You're not. You're comparing me to someone I can never be. I'm not Emily. I never will be." My father appeared in the doorway, his expression darkening as he sensed conflict. "What's going on?" "Madeline is saying she won't host the dinners anymore," my mother replied, her tone suggesting I'd announced I was abandoning the family entirely. My father's face flushed. "After everything we've done for you? This is how you repay us? These dinners are important. They're tradition." "They're torture," I countered, my voice breaking slightly. "Every month I spend days preparing, and all I hear is how I don't measure up to Emily. I'm exhausted." "Well, if you put in the same effort Emily did, I put in more." The volume of my voice surprised even me. I work full-time, I spend my entire weekend shopping, cleaning, cooking, and for what? To be told I'm not good enough. My mother's mouth formed a thin line. If you can't handle a little constructive criticism, it's not constructive. It's constant comparison. I could feel tears threatening, but I blinked them back. When was the last time either of you said thank you or complimented anything I've done? Their silence was answer enough. I think you should leave now, I said quietly. Dinner's over. The echoes of their protests and the slam of the door lingered in my apartment long after they'd gone. I sat on my kitchen floor, back against the cabinets, surrounded by the debris of another failed dinner. The broken plate lay in pieces nearby, a fitting metaphor for what had just happened to our family's precious tradition. I hadn't planned this rebellion. For years, I'd swallowed my resentment along with undercooked meals and overcooked criticisms. I'd internalized their voices until I couldn't distinguish them from my own. Not good enough. Try harder. Why can't you be more like Emily? Emily had always been the golden child, 2 years older, infinitely more accomplished in our parents' eyes. She'd escaped 4 years ago, accepting a job in Seattle that was too good to pass up. At the time, I'd resented her for leaving me to bear the full weight of our parents' expectations. Now, I wondered if she'd been braver than I'd given her credit for. The next morning, I woke to my phone exploding with notifications. Texts from my parents alternated between guilt trips and accusations. The most cutting was from my father. The Hendersons told their daughter they won't be coming to any more dinners. You've ruined a 40-year friendship with your selfishness. I stared at the message until the screen went dark, reflecting my tired face back at me. For the first time in years, I really looked at myself, the dark circles under my eyes. The tension in my jaw that had become so constant, I hardly noticed it anymore. The slump of my shoulders beneath the invisible weight of expectations I could never fulfill. I set the phone down without responding and made myself a cup of tea. Not the bland English breakfast my mother preferred, but the spicy chai I actually enjoyed. As I held the warm mug between my palms, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd made a choice based solely on my own preferences. The silence of my apartment felt different. Not lonely, but peaceful. The realization hit me with startling clarity. This was the first Sunday in 4 years that I hadn't spent anxiously preparing for judgment. My phone buzzed again. My mother, we need to talk about this. You're being ridiculous. Come to lunch today and we'll sort this out. The old Madeline would have acquiesced immediately, eager to smooth things over, to be the peacekeeper, the good daughter. But something had shifted inside me. The crack that had formed last night was widening, letting light into places that had been dark for too long. I'm not available today, I texted back. I need some time to think. Her response was immediate. There's nothing to think about. This is your responsibility. I set the phone down without responding and walked to my bedroom closet. Behind my carefully arranged work clothes was a box I rarely opened. Inside were remnants of interests I'd abandoned over the years. Sketching pencils, half-finished poetry, brochures for cooking classes I'd wanted to take. Things that had been set aside in favor of fulfilling others' expectations. I pulled out a sketchbook and turned to the last page I'd worked on, dated nearly 5 years ago. The unfinished drawing was of the view from my old apartment window. I wondered when exactly I'd decided that my own interests were less important than maintaining the facade of family harmony. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I walked to the park, sat on a bench, and drew. My lines were hesitant at first, rusty from disuse, but gradually grew more confident. I sketched an elderly couple feeding birds, a child chasing a butterfly, the gnarled branches of an oak tree. None of it was perfect. None of it needed to be. 3 weeks passed. My parents' messages grew increasingly manipulative, alternating between thinly veiled guilt, "This is breaking your mother's heart," and outright blame. "The Donovans asked about you. We had to tell them you've abandoned family traditions." I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I used the time I would have spent preparing for their dinners to rediscover myself. I joined a pottery class I'd been eyeing for months. I met friends for brunch without watching the clock. I slept in on Sundays. With each small act of self-determination, I felt more like myself. Or perhaps, more accurately, I began to discover who I might be without the constant background noise of criticism and comparison. "You seem different," my coworker Jasmine commented one day over lunch. "More present." I considered this. I think I'm finally showing up for my own life, I said, surprising myself with the insight. That's profound, she replied. And long overdue, if you don't mind me saying so. I didn't mind. In fact, I found myself increasingly able to hear observations without immediately interpreting them as criticism. When the barista commented that my usual order had changed, I didn't apologize or explain. I simply nodded and enjoyed my new preference. Then came the confrontation I'd been both dreading and expecting. My parents showed up unannounced at my apartment one Sunday afternoon, faces grim with determination. "This has gone on long enough," my father said as they pushed past me into the living room. "You need to apologize and restart the dinners. We've lost two of our oldest friendships because of your tantrum." I closed the door slowly, gathering my thoughts. "I'm sorry your friendships are suffering," I said carefully, "but I'm not responsible for maintaining them." "Of course you are," my mother's voice rose. "These gatherings have been a tradition since before you were born." Emily understood their importance. She never complained. "Emily moved 3,000 miles away," I pointed out. "She found her own way to set boundaries." "Boundaries?" My father scoffed. "What nonsense. This is family. There are no boundaries in family." "There should be," I said quietly. "Healthy ones." My mother prowled around my living room, picking up objects and setting them down with deliberate force. She paused at my pottery wheel, newly installed by the window. "What's this? Some new hobby you're wasting money on?" The comment was so perfectly aligned with her usual tactics that I almost laughed. "Yes," I said simply. "I'm enjoying it." "We didn't raise you to be selfish," she continued, ignoring my response. "Everything we've ever done was for you girls. And I'm grateful for many things you've done," I acknowledged. "But that doesn't mean I have to keep doing something that makes me miserable to prove my gratitude." My father had been unusually quiet, studying me with narrowed eyes. "You've changed," he said finally, as if diagnosing an illness. "I'm changing," I corrected. "It's not the same thing." "So you're just going to throw away family traditions? What will you tell your sister?" The question was meant to be another weapon, but it gave me an idea instead. "Actually, I think I'll call Emily tonight. We haven't really talked in a while." My parents exchanged worried glances. They had always kept us slightly separated, relaying information between us in carefully edited versions. Direct communication was not part of their playbook. "Emily is very busy," my mother said quickly. "She's been having a hard time adjusting to her new promotion." This was news to me. "She got promoted? That's wonderful. All the more reason to catch up." "She doesn't need to be bothered with this drama you're creating," my father said firmly. I looked at them, really looked at them, and saw something I'd never noticed before. Behind their anger and indignation was fear. They were afraid of what would happen if Emily and I compared notes, if we stepped outside the roles they'd assigned us. "I think it's time for you to go," I said, moving toward the door. "I have plans this afternoon." "With who?" My mother's tone was incredulous, as if she couldn't imagine I had a life beyond their orbit. "With myself," I replied, opening the door. "And that's enough." After they left, huffing with indignation but unable to move me from my position, I did something I should have done years ago. I called my sister. "Maddie?" Emily sounded surprised. "Is everything okay?" "Mom and Dad usually call on Sundays." "Everything's changing," I said hesitantly. I stopped hosting the family dinners. There was a long pause, then a low whistle. "Wow, what finally broke you?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean, finally?" "Maddie, I've been waiting for you to stand up for yourself for years. Those dinners were exhausting when I hosted them. Nothing was ever good enough." I felt lightheaded, perching on the edge of my couch. "But they always talk about how perfect everything was when you did it." Emily's laugh was sharp and without humor. "That's their favorite tactic. They did the same to me, you know. Madeline always sets such a beautiful table. Madeline's conversation skills are so refined. It wasn't until I moved that I realized what they were doing. Keeping us competing with each other," I finished, the pieces falling into place. "So neither of us would notice how they were manipulating us." "Exactly." Emily's voice softened. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I just needed to get away completely. To figure out who I was without their voices in my head." "I understand that now," I said, feeling a strange mixture of grief and liberation. I'm starting to do the same. So what happened? What was the final straw? I told her about the broken plate, the moment of clarity, the weeks of rediscovery that followed. As I spoke, the story spilled out of me. Not just the recent events, but years of accumulated hurt and confusion. I always thought you were the favorite, I admitted, that everything came easily to you. God, no, Emily said with feeling. I was just better at faking it. Or maybe I broke earlier, in my own way. By the time I left for Seattle, I was having panic attacks before every dinner. Dad once sent back an entire roast because it was too pink in the middle. I spent the night crying in the bathroom. He never told me that, I said, though I wasn't surprised. All I heard was how your roasts were perfectly cooked every time. We talked for hours that night, comparing notes and memories, uncovering patterns of manipulation so subtle we had internalized them as normal. By the time we hung up, we had made plans for me to visit her in Seattle, my first vacation in years. I can't wait to show you my life here, Emily said. My real life, not the sanitized version Mom and Dad get. And I can't wait to figure out what my real life looks like, I replied. The fallout with my parents intensified over the following weeks. They enlisted relatives to call me, each one armed with a different approach to bring me back in line. My aunt reminded me of family loyalty. My uncle mentioned how much my parents had sacrificed for me. A cousin suggested I might be going through something and should seek therapy. I listened politely to each one, then gently but firmly maintained my position. No, I would not be restarting the dinners. Yes, I was still part of the family. No, this wasn't negotiable. What surprised me most was how quickly my inner voice grew stronger once I gave it permission to speak. Each time I set a boundary and held it, that voice became more confident. I began to recognize the tactics that had kept me compliant for so long. The guilt, the selective storytelling, the constant comparisons. During this time, I continued my pottery classes. There was something profoundly therapeutic about working with clay, a substance that could be shaped and reshaped that responded to gentle pressure and patient hands. My first attempts were lopsided and heavy, but my instructor never compared my work to anyone else's. The clay remembers, she told us. Every touch, every hesitation, every confident stroke, it's all recorded in the final piece. I wondered what my life would look like if I approached it with the same philosophy. If I accepted that every experience, every mistake, every moment of courage was shaping who I was becoming. In my fourth class, I finally created something I was proud of. A small, perfectly imperfect bowl with a blue glaze that reminded me of the ocean. When I showed it to Jasmine over coffee, she admired it without reservation. "It's beautiful, Maddie," she said, turning it in her hands. "It looks like you." "Flawed and asymmetrical?" I joked. "Unique and genuine," she corrected. Like it knows exactly what it is. The visit to Emily's was a revelation. Her apartment was nothing like what our parents had described. Functional but cold. It was warm, filled with books and art and plants. She cooked meals that were delicious but uncomplicated, served on mismatched plates that she picked up at thrift stores because they make me happy. We spent a week together, walking through Seattle's neighborhoods, talking late into the night, rebuilding a relationship that had been stunted by competition and comparison. On my last night there, we sat on her balcony watching the sunset over Puget Sound. "Do you think they can change?" I asked, not needing to specify who I meant. Emily considered this. "I don't know. Maybe. But that's not really the question, is it?" "What's the question then?" "Whether we can change. Whether we can stop needing their approval or fearing their disappointment. Whether we can be sisters instead of rivals." I reached for her hand. "I think we're already answering that one." When I returned home from Seattle, my phone lit up with a notification. A voicemail from my mother. I took a deep breath before pressing play, wrapping my fingers around the blue-glazed bowl I'd brought back from Emily's apartment, a talisman of sorts. "Madeline." My mother's voice was tight, controlled. "Your father and I have been more than patient with this phase of yours. The Donovans have graciously offered to host the dinners at their home every other month. We expect you to attend the first one next Sunday, 3 o'clock. Don't be late." No question about my trip, no acknowledgement of my feelings, just a strategic retreat with an expectation of partial surrender. I set the phone down and ran my fingers along the uneven rim of Emily's bowl. The old Madeline would have marked the date in her calendar immediately, grateful for this olive branch, however thorny. She would have spent the week preparing herself mentally, rehearsing conversations, steeling herself for the inevitable comparisons. But I was no longer that person. That night, I stood in my kitchen, chopping vegetables with a steady rhythm that matched my heartbeat. The simple act of cooking, not for show, not for judgment, but for nourishment, had become a form of meditation. As steam rose from the pot, I felt words forming inside me, gaining clarity and strength. I picked up my phone and called my mother directly. No hiding behind texts or voicemails. She answered on the second ring. "Madeline? Is everything all right?" Her tone suggested that only an emergency would justify my calling outside our usual schedule. "I'm not coming to the Donovans on Sunday," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. A beat of silence. "I don't understand." "I understand the dinners are important to you," I continued, focusing on the knife in my hand, the clean cuts through the carrot. "But I won't be attending. This isn't about finding a compromise that allows the tradition to continue in a slightly different form. It's about recognizing that the tradition itself was harmful to me." "Harmful?" My mother's voice rose in pitch. "That's absurd. These are family dinners, Madeline, not. I'm working on building a healthier relationship with myself and with both of you," I interrupted, surprising myself with my boldness. "That requires honesty and boundaries. I love you, but I need you to understand that I am not an extension of you or a replacement for Emily. I am my own person with my own life." I could hear her breathing on the other end, quick and shallow. When she didn't respond, I added, "I'd like to invite you and Dad to dinner at my place next month, not as a continuation of the old tradition, but as the start of something new. Just the three of us. No comparisons, no criticism." "This is ridiculous," she said finally, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "Your father will be very disappointed." "I know," I said gently. "The invitation stands. Let me know if you'd like to come." I ended the call and felt a surge of something warm and unfamiliar in my chest. Pride, perhaps. Or self-respect. I stirred the pot of soup I was making. Not my mother's recipe with its precise measurements, but something of my own creation. Improvised and imperfect and exactly what I wanted. 2 weeks passed with no word from my parents. I continued with my life, work, pottery, occasional dinners with friends, regular calls with Emily. The silence from my parents didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt like the space I needed to grow. Then, on a rainy Tuesday evening as I was unloading my latest pottery pieces from the kiln, my phone rang. My father's name lit up the screen. I steadied myself before answering. "Hi, Dad. Madeline." His voice sounded older, slightly uncertain. "Your mother told me about your... my invitation," I corrected gently. "Yes, well," he cleared his throat. "We've been discussing it." The silence stretched between us, filled with decades of unspoken expectations. "We'd like to come," he said finally, "to your dinner." I nearly dropped the mug I'd been holding. "You would?" "Yes." Another pause, heavy with effort. "Just to be clear, this would be a regular dinner? Nothing elaborate?" I smiled to myself, recognizing the concern beneath his question. "Nothing elaborate," I confirmed. "Just food and conversation." "All right, then." The relief in his voice was palpable. "Let us know when." It wasn't exactly warmth, but it was movement. A crack in the fortress of their certainty. 6 months after that final traditional dinner, I hosted a gathering of my own. Not out of obligation, but out of desire. My apartment filled with friends, some old, some from my pottery class. Emily joined by video call, raising a glass from Seattle. The centerpiece of my table was a collection of ceramics I'd made myself. Imperfect, colorful, uniquely mine. My parents arrived exactly on time, bearing a bottle of wine and uncomfortable smiles. They looked out of place among my eclectic friends, but they made an effort. My father asked about my pottery. My mother complimented the simple pasta dish I'd prepared without once mentioning Emily's superior sauce-making abilities. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of tension, old patterns threatening to reassert themselves. But when my mother began to criticize the wine glasses for being smudged, she caught herself mid-sentence. Our eyes met, and something passed between us. An acknowledgement, perhaps, of the fragile new understanding we were trying to build. On my coffee table sat the blue-glazed bowl from my pottery class, slightly lopsided. uniquely mine. Like the life I was slowly, steadily reclaiming, some traditions deserve to be continued. Others need to be broken so that something healthier can grow in their place. The wisdom is in knowing the difference and finding the courage to act on that knowledge, even when it feels like betrayal. In the quiet of my apartment, surrounded by the evidence of my emerging self, I finally understood. Setting boundaries isn't abandoning family. It's creating space for authentic connection to take root and grow. A connection based not on performance or comparison, but on the radical acceptance of each other's true selves. The journey wasn't over. Healing rarely follows a linear path. There would be setbacks and old wounds reopened. But for the first time in my adult life, I was walking my own path, guided by my own inner voice rather than the echoes of others' expectations. And that made all the difference.